Hello to all of you. We switch philosophers, as you know. I mentioned Kant in a previous video. I have no idea why I said that. Obviously, we do not move to Kant. We move to John Stuart Mill, Utilitarianism. And if you have taken other philosophy courses before, introductory courses or anything like that, I am certain you have discussed utilitarianism at least to some extent. But in this first video, there will be a couple of other videos today. In this first video, I wanted to mention the difference between Aristotle and what we read now, John Stuart Mill. So for Aristotle, if you remember, he was concentrating on virtue. But he was concentrating on virtue because his main question was, what is the good life? What is happiness for a human being? What is eudaimonia? How do I achieve eudaimonia, happiness? And as you remember, we said that there seem to be three parts for happiness. One of them, the most important one, is the life of contemplation that is never taken away from us. That is, I can always be in contemplation of the genuine realities, and health does not preclude me from doing so, or any other external things. But remember, contemplation is not about staying and looking at the moon or the sun or the wonderful weather outside. It's just contemplating ideas. And the other two parts were the virtues, if you remember, and then the last one, the external goods. And if you want to know for Aristotle what is the right action, you have to know what virtue is. So the right action would be the one done out of virtue. John Stuart Mill doesn't talk about virtue. He doesn't think about how I should be in order to achieve happiness. But in his utilitarianist perspective, he's trying to find out what the right action is. So remember, we're not going to talk about righteous human beings or about happy human beings or about excellent human beings. We talk now about actions. It's a completely different approach. And if I want to talk about action, I want to know what is the principle according to which I judge a certain action. How can I say that an action is good or wrong? And John Stuart Mill says, well, we have to know the consequences of an action. Utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory. That means that we decide whether an action is right or wrong depending on whether the consequences lead to happiness or not, or absence of pain and presence of pleasure, if I want to put it this way. But then you have to figure out consequences for whom. And John Stuart Mill, as the majority of the other utilitarianists, will say, well, it's not about the agent. The agent is the one who acts. If I try to find out whether my action is right or wrong, the agent in that action is me, because I am doing the action. So the question is not about the agent. That is, if the consequences of the agent's action are positive or negative for the agent, but rather for all the people concerned by that action. So what I have to figure out is to see what are the consequences in terms of pleasure and pain for each of the people that are affected by whatever I am doing. So let's consider an action. If I wonder whether giving alms to another human being is a right action or not, it's a good action or not, moral action, I have to figure out what are the consequences for my action, for all the coming out of my action, for all the people concerned. Well, who are the people concerned? Clearly the one to whom I'm giving alms, me, all the entire family of the human being that I'm helping, and also my entire family, because giving alms to others means taking wealth from me, which implies I'm taking wealth from other people that are connected with me. So I have to figure out whether I produce pain or pleasure for each one of us, and I'm not saying, for the moment at least, whether I do produce pain or pleasure. What I'm trying to say is that I have to clarify what are the consequences for all the people concerned, because utilitarianism is a social theory. Utilitarianism of the kind that John Stuart Mill presents is a social consequentialist theory. So it looks at consequences, consequentialist, but it also looks at the consequences for all people concerned, social. Often Mill is also described as, or his theory is described as being a hedonistic theory, because he talks in terms of pain and pleasure. How can I measure the consequences of an action? Well, he would say, I have to measure it in terms of the units of pleasure and the units of pain that my action produces. So what I have to clarify is to see how much pleasure giving alms to somebody produces to that person, it produces to me, it produces to his family, it produces to my family, and how much pain does it produce to me, to him, and so on. Maybe, I can say that it produces to somebody because that person, if I give money to somebody, let's say, that person may feel bad if I do so because, I harm somehow his pride. You can figure out various ways in which you calculate all this. We are not going into the details of how to calculate that, although that's very important and we have to figure that out. But in this first video, I wanted to mention two things. First of all, there's a huge difference between Aristotle and John Stuart Mill in terms of approach. Aristotle does not think about actions. He thinks about the good life of a human being because he's thinking about excellence. And he also wants to find out what is the happy life, eudaimonia. John Stuart Mill does not think about excellence of a human being. He thinks about acts. So what I do as a human being. And he judges whether acts are right or wrong, or my actions are right or wrong. And in order to do so, he has to figure out an idea of the good. What is the principle according to which I judge those actions? Principles, and this principle has to do with consequences that are for all people concerned, and the results are measured in the units of pain and pleasure. I will come back and I will mention a few other things about the various kinds of pleasure that you can discuss in utilitarianism.